The sun hung like a molten coin in the bleached sky, its heat pressing down on the desert with the weight of an iron. Sarah McKenna stumbled forward, her boots dragging furrows in the sand. 3 days. 3 days since the Apache raid had scattered their wagon train like leaves before a storm. 3 days since she'd watched her husband Thomas fall with an arrow in his chest, his blood soaking into the thirsty earth. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The last drops from her canteen had been gone since yesterday morning. The rifle she'd grabbed during the chaos had become a walking stick, its weight both burden and anchor. Around her stretched nothing but sand, scrub brush, and the wavering heat that made the horizon dance like water she'd never reach. Sarah paused, squinting through swollen eyes at the landscape. Which way was Fort Buchanan? Which way was anywhere? The sun had wheeled across the sky so many times she'd lost all sense of direction. Her bonnet hung limp around her shoulders, the ties broken, offering no protection from the brutal heat. The blue calico dress that had been her pride was now torn and stained with sweat, blood, and the red dust of the desert. A lizard skittered across a nearby rock, and Sarah watched it with dull envy. Even that small creature knew where it was going, knew where to find shade and moisture. She forced herself to take another step, then another. The alternative was to lie down in the sand and let the desert claim her. But Thomas wouldn't have wanted that. He'd fought so hard to bring them west, to California and the promise of gold and green valleys. The memory of his face rose unbidden, not as she'd last seen him, twisted in pain and surprise, but from their wedding day in Independence. He'd been so proud, standing tall in his borrowed suit, promising her a life of adventure. Well, she'd gotten adventure, hadn't she? The bitter laugh that escaped her throat sounded like the caw of a crow. Sarah's foot caught on a stone, and she went down hard, skinning her palms on the burning sand. For a moment, she stayed there on her hands and knees, head hanging, watching the drops of blood from her torn hands disappear into the earth. Just like Thomas's blood, just like everything they'd dreamed of. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up, Sarah Louise McKenna. You're not dead yet." But when she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't cooperate. The horizon tilted, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. This was it. Then she'd die here, and the buzzards would pick her bones clean. And no one would ever know what became of Judge McKenna's daughter, who'd run off to marry a dreamer. She managed to drag herself to the meager shade of a Joshua tree, its twisted arms offering little relief from the sun. Sarah propped herself against its trunk, the rifle across her lap, and tried to remember prayers from childhood. "Our Father, who art in heaven." But the words scattered like dust. God seemed very far away from this scorched corner of creation. Time became fluid. The sun crept across the sky, and shadows began to lengthen. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, tormented by dreams of water, the well behind her father's house in Missouri, the creek where she'd washed clothes just last week, Thomas's canteen that she'd watched roll away during the attack. It was the silence that woke her, the desert, which had been filled with the buzz of insects and the distant cry of hawks, had gone utterly still. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her hand instinctively tightening on the rifle. This was the silence that came before a storm, or before a predator struck. There, on the ridge above her, silhouetted against the dying light of day, a figure on horseback, as still as the rocks around him. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Apache. It had to be. No soldier or settler would sit so motionless, so perfectly merged with the landscape. She tried to raise the rifle, but her arms had no more strength than wet paper. The weapon slipped from her numb fingers, thudding into the sand. The figure on the ridge didn't move. He simply watched, patient as the mountains themselves. Sarah wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but her body had reached its limits. All she could do was stare back at that motionless silhouette, waiting for him to decide her fate. The stories she'd heard echoed in her mind, tales of torture, of women carried off to fates worse than death. But there were other stories too, whispered ones, of unexpected mercy, of Apache who'd helped lost travelers. Which kind was this? The horse began to pick its way down the slope, moving with the sure-footed grace of an animal born to this terrain. As it drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. The rider was tall, lean, with long black hair held back by a cloth band. He wore the cotton shirt and hide leggings of his people, and across his saddle lay a rifle that caught the last rays of sun. He stopped 20 feet away, studying her with eyes as dark and unreadable as obsidian. Sarah tried to speak, to plead or threaten or something, but her throat produced only a rasping croak. The Apache dismounted in one fluid motion, his moccasined feet making no sound on the sand. Sarah pressed herself harder against the Joshua tree, though she knew it was useless. If he meant to kill her, she had no defense left, but instead of drawing a weapon, he reached for something tied to his saddle, a water gourd. He approached slowly, the way a man might approach a wounded animal. When he was close enough, Sarah could see the scars on his arms, the weathered lines of his face that spoke of countless days under this same merciless sun. He was perhaps 30 winters, maybe 35. His expression remained neutral, giving away nothing of his intentions. The Apache knelt just out of arm's reach and set the gourd in the sand, then pushed it toward her with the barrel of his rifle. Water? He was offering her water. Sarah's need overcame her fear. She lunged for the gourd with shaking hands, spilling precious drops in her haste. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. Slowly, he said, the English word heavily accented but clear. Drink slowly. Sarah forced herself to take small sips, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it all down. The Apache watched her, his gaze traveling from her torn dress to her bleeding hands to the rifle lying useless in the sand. When she'd drunk half the gourd, he held up his hand, and she reluctantly lowered it. "Your people?" he asked. "Dead." The word came out as a whisper. "Scattered. I don't know." He nodded as if he'd expected this answer. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind beginning to pick up as evening approached. Finally, he stood and walked back to his horse, and Sarah's heart sank. He was leaving her here. At least she'd die with water in her belly. But instead of mounting, he pulled items from his pack, a blanket, some dried meat wrapped in cloth, a small leather pouch. He returned and set them beside her, then looked at the eastern horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "The night comes," he said. "Cold comes. Fire keeps away the hunters." Sarah didn't understand until he began gathering dry brush and arranging it with practiced efficiency. He was making camp. Here. With her. The Apache who should be her enemy was building her a fire as darkness crept across the desert. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. He paused in his work, considering. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. The desert takes enough lives, no need to feed it more. As the fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the rocks, Sarah studied her unexpected savior. He worked with quiet competence, creating a small circle of warmth and light in the vast darkness. When he handed her a piece of dried meat, she took it with trembling fingers, trying to reconcile the terrifying stories with this quiet act of mercy. "I am called Samuel Crawford," she said, realizing he might not care but needing to reclaim some piece of her identity. "Sarah. My name is Sarah." He glanced at her, and for just a moment, something that might have been sympathy flickered in those dark eyes. "I am Sela," he said, "in your tongue, eagle." As the stars wheeled overhead and the fire popped and hissed, Sarah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and wondered if she'd traded one death for another. But for now, she was alive. She had water, food, warmth. Tomorrow could bring what it would. Tonight, she sat across the fire from an Apache warrior who'd chosen mercy over vengeance. And that was miracle enough. The desert wind moaned through the rocks, carrying the distant howl of coyotes. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter and watched Sela tend the fire, his movements economical and sure. Neither spoke again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the terrible quiet of impending death, but something else, a fragile truce between two souls who'd lost too much to this unforgiving land. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling into the desert night. Sarah watched Sela through the dancing flames, trying to read something in his weathered face. He sat cross-legged, his rifle within easy reach, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Every so often, his gaze would shift to her, quick and assessing, before returning to his vigil. She dozed fitfully through the night, jerking awake each time the fire popped or the wind shifted. Each time, she found him exactly as before, alert, watchful, as immovable as the ancient rocks surrounding them. Now, as the eastern sky began to pale from black to deep blue, exhaustion weighed on her like a physical thing. "You don't sleep," she said, her voice hoarse despite the water. "Sleep comes when it is safe," he replied without looking at her. "This place is not safe." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The pre-dawn air was cold enough to see her breath. "Because of animals or men," he said simply. "Your people, my people, both hunt these lands." The implications of his words settled over her like frost. She was sitting at a fire with a man both sides would kill on sight. Her people because he was Apache, his because she was white. Yet here they sat, sharing warmth while the desert waited to claim whoever was foolish enough to travel it alone. Sela rose in one smooth motion and walked to his horse, returning with more dried meat and a handful of what looked like nuts or seeds. He divided the meager meal, handing her half. Sarah took it gratefully, trying not to wolf it down. The meat was tough and salty, the seeds bitter, but it was sustenance. "Where will you go?" he asked suddenly, the question catching her off guard. Sarah looked down at her torn dress, her blistered hands. Where would she go? Fort Buchanan was days away, and she didn't even know which direction. The nearest town might be Tucson, but that too was a guess. "I don't know," she admitted. "My husband? We were going to California. He had a cousin in Sacramento who wrote about opportunities there." "California is far, very far. Everything is far from here," Sarah said, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. "This whole territory is nothing but distance and death." Sela's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "This is not empty land. It is home. My people have walked these paths for generations beyond counting." He gestured to the landscape beginning to emerge in the growing light. Each rock, each spring, each mountain has a name, a story. "You see death, I see life." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Life? Your people killed my husband, killed friends I'd known since independence. How is that life?" "And your soldiers burn our crops," Sela replied, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "Kill our women and children, take our water holes, drive us from valleys where our ancestors are buried. This war did not begin with us." They stared at each other across the fire, the weight of history and blood between them. Sarah wanted to argue, to defend her people's right to settle this land, but the words died in her throat. She'd seen what the cavalry did to Apache camps. She'd heard the soldiers bragging about their victories against women and children. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I spoke without thinking." Sela studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. The tension eased, though it didn't disappear entirely. He began to break camp with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown in making it, scattering the ashes, collecting his few belongings. Sarah struggled to her feet, her body protesting every movement. "You cannot walk far," he observed, watching her sway. "I can manage." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it was a lie. Her feet were swollen inside her boots. Her legs trembled with each step. and the sun wasn't even fully up yet. Sela packed his horse in silence, securing his rifle and supplies. When he was finished, he stood beside the animal, one hand on its neck, clearly wrestling with some decision. Finally, he spoke. "There is a spring, half-day's ride, hidden, safe. I will take you there." "Why?" Sarah asked, the same question as the night before. "Why help me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was low, meant only for her. 3 summers ago, soldiers came to our camp while the men were hunting. My sister tried to run with her baby. They shot her. The child—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "A woman from your wagon train, hair like corn silk, found the baby in the brush. She could have left him to die, could have given him to the soldiers. Instead, she carried him to the mission at San Xavier. The priests there. They have Apache women who serve. The child lives." Sarah's breath caught. "That was Mrs. Holcomb, the minister's wife. She never said—" "She would not speak of it, but I watched. I saw—" Sela's dark eyes met hers. "Now I repay the debt." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, then held out his hand to her. Sarah hesitated. To ride with him meant trusting him completely, putting her life entirely in his hands. But what choice did she have, die here of thirst and exposure, or take the offered chance? She grasped his hand, calloused and strong, and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under the added weight but stood steady. Sarah had no choice but to wrap her arms around Sela's waist to keep from falling. He was warm and solid, smelling of smoke and leather and something else. Sage, perhaps. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Sarah had never seen the landscape from this perspective, moving through it with someone who knew its secrets. Sela guided the horse along paths she couldn't see, through narrow canyons and across ridges that seemed impassable until they were suddenly through. As the heat grew, he stopped in the shade of an overhanging rock and gave her water. Sarah drank carefully, aware of how precious each drop was. When she handed the gourd back, their fingers brushed, and she felt an unexpected jolt. Sela's expression remained unreadable, but he held her gaze a moment longer than necessary before turning away. They continued on, the rhythm of the horse's gait almost hypnotic. Sarah found herself noticing things, the way Sela's hair caught the light, the graceful strength in his movements, the gentle way he guided the horse. She tried to push these thoughts away. Her husband was barely 3 days dead. This man was Apache, was supposed to be her enemy. Yet here she was, trusting him with her life, feeling. What gratitude, something more. The spring, when they reached it, was indeed hidden, a small pool of clear water tucked beneath an overhang of rock, surrounded by cottonwoods that provided blessed shade. Sela dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. For a moment, they stood close, and Sarah could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He stepped back first, gesturing to the spring. "Drink, rest, the water is good." Sarah knelt by the pool, cupping the cool water in her hands, drinking deeply. When she looked up, Sela was tending his horse, checking its hooves, running his hands along its legs. The simple domesticity of the act made him seem suddenly less foreign, more human. "Will you stay?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He paused in his work. "The sun is high. Rest is needed." That wasn't quite an answer, but Sarah took it as a yes. She found a smooth spot beneath the trees and sat, grateful for the shade. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could hurt, but she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Sela built a small fire and produced more food from his pack, this time including some kind of flat bread and dried berries. They ate in companionable silence. The tension of the morning faded to something almost peaceful. When he handed her the water gourd, Sarah found herself studying his hands. Strong, scarred, capable, hands that could kill, but had chosen to save. "Your husband," Sela said suddenly. "He was good to you." The question surprised her. Sarah considered her answer. Yes, Thomas he was kind, full of dreams. He wanted to build something in California, make a life away from all the fighting. She swallowed hard. He didn't deserve to die like that. "No one deserves to die in fear and pain," Sela said quietly. "Apache or white, but the desert doesn't care what we deserve." They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the trees, a bird called. Sarah found herself wondering about Sela's life. Did he have a wife, children? What had driven him to ride alone in lands where both Apache and white men would see him as a target? As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Sarah realized she didn't want this strange peace to end. Out here, with just the two of them, the larger war seemed very far away. But she knew it was an illusion. Soon, she would have to decide, try to reach Fort Buchanan and return to a world where Sela was the enemy, or what? What other choice was there? She looked at him across the fire and found him watching her. Something unreadable in his expression. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. Two souls damaged by the same conflict, finding an unexpected moment of understanding in the midst of chaos. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. Soon, night would fall again, and with it would come decisions that couldn't be postponed. But for now, Sarah was content to sit in the shade of the cottonwoods, sharing silence with an Apache warrior who'd shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. Tomorrow would bring what it would. Tonight, she was safe. The second night fell softer than the first. Sarah sat closer to the fire now, no longer pressed against the farthest rock. Sela had shot a rabbit with an arrow so swift and silent she'd barely seen him move. Now the meat roasted over the coals, filling the air with a scent that made her stomach clench with hunger. "You move like the wind," she said, watching him turn the spit. "I've never seen anyone shoot like that." "My grandfather taught me," Sela replied. "He could hit a running deer at full gallop. Said the bow speaks truer than rifles because it carries part of your spirit with the arrow." Sarah found herself leaning forward, drawn by the rare personal detail. "Tell me about him, your grandfather." Sela's hands stilled for a moment. He was a man of peace, strange to say of a warrior, but true. He fought only when forced, preferred to speak of the old stories, when Apache and Mexican traders would meet in peace. His voice carried a weight of memory. "He died when soldiers burned our winter stores, not from bullets, from the slow hunger that followed." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken accusation. Sarah felt the familiar guilt rise in her throat. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "You did not burn our food," Sela said simply, "just as I did not kill your husband." "No," Sarah agreed, "but we're part of it. Aren't we, this whole terrible thing?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah felt exposed under that steady gaze. "Yes," he said finally, "we are part of it, but perhaps—" He trailed off, returning his attention to the cooking meat. Perhaps what? Nothing. Foolish thoughts. They ate in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Sarah could feel questions building behind it, pressing against her teeth. When she could stand it no longer, she spoke. "Why do you ride alone? Where is your band?" Sela set down the bone he'd been gnawing. "Gone, scattered, some to San Carlos, some to Mexico, some—" he gestured at the night, "some to the spirit world." "Your family?" "My sister, as I told you. My brother fell at Apache Pass. My mother took sick at San Carlos. My father—" His jaw tightened. He would not go to the reservation, chose to fight until the end. It was an end that came quickly. Sarah's eyes burned with unexpected tears. How similar their stories were. Painted in different colors, but the same shape. My parents died of cholera on the trail to Oregon when I was 15. My older brother made it to the Willamette Valley, but I stayed in Independence with my aunt. That's where I met Thomas. He was working at the general store, saving every penny for California. You loved him. It wasn't a question. Sarah considered her answer. I thought I did. Maybe I loved the idea of him more, the escape he offered, the adventure. He was kind to me, and after years of being my aunt's unpaid servant, kindness felt like love. She surprised herself with the honesty. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? It sounds true, Sela said. Truth is rarely terrible. It simply is. They fell quiet again. But now Sarah was acutely aware of his presence across the fire, the way the flames cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the depth of his eyes. She tried to focus on something else, but her gaze kept returning to him. You're staring, he said without looking up. Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. I'm sorry, I grew up hearing such stories about Apache warriors. Terrible stories. But what am I? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah swallowed hard. Different, she said finally. You're different. Am I? Sela's voice held an edge she hadn't heard before. I have killed men, Sarah, many men. I have taken scalps, burned wagons, done things that would make your terrible stories seem tame. Sarah's breath caught, but she didn't look away. But not without reason. Does reason matter to the dead? It matters to the living, Sarah said firmly. It matters to me. Sela finally looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. You are also different, he said quietly. Most white women would be screaming, fainting, begging. You sit here discussing philosophy while eating rabbit with a savage. You're not a savage, Sarah said, surprised by her own vehemence. A savage wouldn't have helped me, wouldn't have... She gestured helplessly at the fire, the food, the safety he'd provided. Wouldn't have what? The air between them suddenly felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Wouldn't have made me feel... She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Sela rose abruptly and walked to the spring. Sarah watched him kneel by the water, splash his face, stand with his back to her for a long moment. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral. Tomorrow, I will take you closer to Fort Buchanan, he said. Another day's ride, maybe 2, and you can signal a patrol. And then, Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Then you return to your people. Tell them Apache killed your husband. If you wish, they will give you sympathy, perhaps money for passage back east. I won't lie about you, Sarah said firmly. I won't let them think. What will you tell them? Sela interrupted. That an Apache warrior saved you, gave you food and water. They will not believe it, or worse, they will believe it and think you... He stopped, jaw clenching. Think I what? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Think you gave yourself to me in exchange for your life, he said bluntly. That is what they expect of Apache warriors and white women. The words hit Sarah like cold water. Of course, that's what they'd think. A woman alone with an Apache for days, her reputation would be ruined, regardless of the truth. I don't care what they think, she said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. You will care, Sela said. When they look at you with those thoughts in their eyes, when no decent man will have you, when they whisper behind their hands. Then I won't go to Fort Buchanan, Sarah said suddenly. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. I'll go to Tucson instead, or Mexico, somewhere they don't know me. Alone with no money, no supplies. I survived this long. You survived because I found you. Sela reminded her. The desert is not so forgiving twice. Sarah stood, pacing to the edge of the firelight. Then what do you suggest? What choices do I have that don't end in death or disgrace? Sela was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. There is another way, but it is not a path for white women. Tell me. Some Apache women who lose their families join other bands, become someone new. He paused. But you are not Apache. Sarah turned to face him. Could I learn? The question hung between them like a bridge over a chasm. Sela's expression was unreadable in the firelight. It is not an easy life, always moving, always watching for soldiers. Never enough food, cold in winter, burning in summer. And my people, not all would accept you, many would see only an enemy. But would you accept me? The words were out before Sarah could stop them. Sela went very still. That is a dangerous question. These are dangerous times, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Would you, Sela? He stood slowly, crossed to where she stood at the edge of the darkness. This close. She could see the pulse beating in his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his body. You don't know what you're asking, he said, his voice rough. Don't I? Sarah lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. I'm asking if there's a place for me in your world, since I no longer have one in mine. And if I said yes, if I said I would teach you our ways, protect you from those who would harm you, what then? Sarah's mouth went dry. Then I would go with you. Even knowing what it means, the hardship, the danger, the fact that you could never go back. There's nothing to go back to, Sarah said simply. Thomas is dead. I have no family, no home, just a trunk of clothes on a burned wagon somewhere in the desert. Sela reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. His hand was calloused but gentle. You have courage, he said softly. But courage alone doesn't survive in the desert. Then teach me what does, Sarah whispered. For a moment, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then Sela dropped his hand and stepped back. Sleep, he said, his voice rough. Tomorrow we decide. Sarah returned to her place by the fire, wrapping herself in the blanket. But sleep was impossible. She watched Sela settle into his customary position, rifle across his knees, and wondered at her own boldness. 3 days ago, she'd been a married woman heading to California. Now she was proposing to disappear into Apache lands with a warrior she barely knew. But as she watched him keeping vigil through the long night, Sarah realized it wasn't impulse driving her. It was recognition. In Sela, she saw another soul carved hollow by loss, another survivor making their way through a world that seemed determined to destroy them both. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself in Apache dress, learning their language, their customs. It seemed impossible. But then, so had surviving the desert alone. When dawn came, it would bring decisions that would change everything. But for now, she lay by the fire and listened to the quiet breathing of the man who'd saved her life, wondering if he might save more than that. Wondering if she might save him too. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next, black clouds boiled up from the southwest like smoke from a prairie fire. Sela had been teaching Sarah to read the desert signs, which plants held water, which tracks meant danger, which birds called warnings. But he'd gone suddenly still, head tilted, reading something in the air she couldn't sense. Storm, he said simply. Big one, we need shelter. They'd been traveling since dawn. Heading northwest toward the Dragoon Mountains, Sarah had thought they'd have more time to decide her fate. But the desert had other plans. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground beneath their feet. There, Sela pointed to a narrow canyon cutting into the rocky hillside. Cave system. Used it before. They barely made it before the sky opened. Rain in the desert didn't fall. It hammered down in sheets, turning dry washes into raging torrents within minutes. Sarah had never seen anything like it. Water poured off the rocks in waterfalls, and the canyon below them became a churning river of mud and debris. The cave was deeper than it appeared, cutting back into the hillside. Sela led his horse as far inside as it would go, then quickly gathered what dry wood he could find near the entrance. Within minutes, he had a small fire going, its smoke drawn up through some natural chimney in the rock. They were soaked through, both shivering in the sudden cold. Sarah's dress clung to her like a second skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself, teeth chattering, without a word. Sela pulled a dry blanket from his protected saddle pack and held it out to her. "You'll catch fever," he said. "Change into this, I'll turn away." Sarah took the blanket gratefully, but hesitated. "What about you?" "I've survived worse." But she could see him shivering too, his cotton shirt plastered to his skin. "We'll share," she said firmly. "Both of us sick helps neither." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. He turned his back while she struggled out of her sodden dress, wrapping the blanket around herself like a sarong. The rough wool scratched against her skin, but it was blessed dry. "All right," she said softly. When he turned back, his expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the quick sweep of his gaze before he looked away. She sat by the fire, holding one end of the blanket open in invitation. For a moment, Sela stood frozen, clearly wrestling with himself. "Please," Sarah said. "You saved my life. Let me at least keep you warm." Thunder crashed outside, making the decision for him. He sat beside her, and Sarah drew the blanket around them both. The sudden closeness was overwhelming, his shoulder against hers, the heat of his body seeping through the thin barrier of his wet shirt. "This is not proper," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Nothing about this is proper," Sarah replied. "But proper doesn't keep us warm." They sat in silence, watching the fire, intensely aware of each other. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that seemed personal, as if the desert itself was angry at their growing connection. Water poured past the cave entrance in sheets, and lightning turned the world white in stuttering glimpses. "Tell me about your world," Sarah said, needing to fill the charged silence. If I came with you, what would it be like?" Sela stared into the fire for a long moment. "Hard," he said finally. "We move with the seasons, following game and water. In summer, we go high into the mountains where it's cool. Winter, down to the valleys, always watching for soldiers, for enemies. The women work harder than the men, gathering food, preparing hides, making everything we need to survive." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Sarah said. "It's not just work, it's... everything would be different. The way you dress, speak, think. Apache women are strong, but they know their place. You would have to learn our language, our customs. Some would never accept you. They would see your blue eyes and remember all the Apache blood spilled by blue-eyed soldiers." "And you?" Sarah asked quietly. "What would you see?" Sela turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I see a woman with courage, but I also see complications, difficulties I would bring to my people." "That's not what I asked," Sarah said, her heart hammering. "What do you see when you look at me?" The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the sharp planes and angles. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I see something I should not want." The confession hung between them like a physical thing. Sarah felt heat flood through her that had nothing to do with the fire or the shared blanket. "And do you want?" Instead of answering with words, Sela reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent sparks through her entire body. Sarah leaned into his hand without thinking, her eyes fluttering closed. "This is dangerous," he murmured, but his hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Everything is dangerous," Sarah whispered back. "The whole world is dangerous. But this—" She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "This doesn't feel dangerous. It feels right." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a brilliant moment, and Sarah saw her own hunger reflected in his eyes. Then his control cracked. His hand slid into her hair, and he drew her to him, their lips meeting in a kiss that was desperate and gentle all at once. Sarah had been kissed before, Thomas's respectful pecks, a few stolen moments with Bose back in Independence. But this was different. This was fire and need, and something wild that matched the storm outside. She pressed closer, her hands finding their way to his chest, feeling his heart hammering as hard as her own. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sella's hand was still tangled in her hair, and Sarah could feel the tremor in it. "This changes everything," he said roughly. "Everything's already changed," Sarah replied. "From the moment you gave me water instead of leaving me to die." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You don't understand. Among my people, to take a woman means to claim her, to be responsible for her. It's not something done lightly. And among mine, a widow shouldn't feel this way about any man, let alone—" Sarah swallowed. "Let alone an Apache warrior. But I do, Sella, God help me, I do." Thunder crashed again, shaking the cave. Sella pulled her closer, and Sarah went willingly, burying her face against his neck. He smelled of rain and smoke and something essentially male that made her dizzy. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time since the attack on the wagon train, Sarah felt truly safe. "If you come with me," he said against her hair, "it won't be easy. My people are scattered, hunted. We live day to day, never knowing when the soldiers will find us. You would give up everything, your language, your customs, your God." "My God hasn't been much help lately," Sarah said wryly. "And what customs? The ones that say I should mourn properly for a year, the ones that say I should find another husband to take care of me because a woman can't survive alone. I'm already breaking all of them. And if my people reject you, if they see you as enemy, always—" Sarah pulled back enough to look at him. "Then we make our own way, Apache or white or something in between. The desert doesn't care what we call ourselves, as long as we're strong enough to survive it." Sella studied her face in the firelight. "You would do this, leave everything behind for uncertainty." "I'd leave everything behind for you," Sarah said simply. "That's the truth of it? These past days, I've felt more alive with you than I did in years of proper marriage." "Maybe that makes me wicked. Maybe I should be ashamed. But I'm not." He kissed her again then, deeper this time, and Sarah felt herself melting against him. When his hand skimmed her bare shoulders where the blanket had slipped, she shivered but didn't pull away. There was a question in his touch, and she answered it by pressing closer, by threading her fingers through his long hair. "Sarah," he breathed against her lips, a warning and a plea all at once. "I know," she whispered. "I know what this means. I choose it. I choose you." The storm outside seemed to echo the storm between them. When Sella laid her back on the sandy floor of the cave, Sarah went willingly, pulling him down with her. The blanket was soft beneath them, the fire warm on their skin. His hands were gentle but sure, treating her with a reverence that made her eyes burn with unexpected tears. Later, they lay entwined, the blanket covering them both, listening to the rain beginning to slacken outside. Sarah traced patterns on Sella's chest, marveling at the fact that she felt no shame, no regret, only a bone-deep contentment she'd never known before. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Sella's arms tightened around her. "Now you are mine," he said simply, "and I am yours, among my people. This is marriage, not papers or ceremonies. but choosing, binding. Good, Sarah said fiercely. Because I'm not letting you go. He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. Stubborn woman, you may regret this when you're sleeping on the ground and eating mesquite beans. I've been sleeping on the ground for days, Sarah pointed out. At least now I'll have someone to keep me warm. They lay in comfortable silence, watching the fire die down to coals. Outside, the storm was passing, leaving behind the clean smell of rain on desert stone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finding his people, convincing them to accept her, learning to live in a world completely foreign to everything she'd known. But for now, Sarah was content to lie in the arms of her Apache warrior, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safer than she ever had in her proper life. The storm had washed away the last of her old world. In the morning, she would rise as someone new, not Sarah McKenna, widow and proper lady, but simply Sarah, woman of the Apache, claimed and claiming in equal measure. The desert had taken everything from her, but it had given her this, a love born of loss and survival, fierce as the storm that blessed it. And that, Sarah thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth any price. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, the desert washed clean and sparkling. Sarah woke to find Sela already up, standing at the cave entrance, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. Something in his posture made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping the blanket around herself as she joined him. He pointed to the horizon where dust clouds rose like smoke signals. "Riders, many of them, coming this way." Sarah's heart began to race. "Soldiers?" "Can't tell yet, but we need to move." He turned to her, his face grave. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need truth. Do you understand what happened between us last night? What it means?" "You said it yourself. I'm yours now, and you're mine." She lifted her chin. "I haven't changed my mind, if that's what you're asking. Even if those riders are soldiers, even if they offer to take you back to safety, to your own people." Sarah reached up to touch his face. "My people are wherever you are now." Something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "Then we ride, hard and fast. Can you do it?" "I'll do whatever I have to." They broke camp with practiced efficiency. Sarah now moving with the quick silence Sela had been teaching her. Her dress, dried by the fire, felt strange on her body after the night's intimacy. She found herself wishing for the practical clothing of Apache women, the freedom of movement, the ability to ride astride without scandal. As they emerged from the canyon, the dust clouds were closer. Sela lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. This time, when she pressed back against him, it was with the familiarity of lovers, not strangers. "Where will we go?" she asked as they began to move. "First, away from here. Then," he paused. "There's something I should tell you. My band isn't completely gone. A small group still holds out in the Chiricahua Mountains. My uncle leads them, but Sarah, they may not accept me. I know." She placed her hand over his on the reins. "We'll face that when we come to it." They rode hard through the morning, stopping only to water the horse at hidden springs Sela knew. By midday, the dust clouds had faded behind them, but new ones appeared to the east. It seemed the whole territory was suddenly alive with movement. "Something's happened," Sela said, studying the patterns of dust. "Too many riders, from too many directions. This isn't normal patrol." As if in answer to his words, they heard it, the distant sound of gunfire, echoing off the canyon walls. Not a single shot, but a sustained exchange. A battle. Sela's body went rigid behind her. "That's from Sulphur Springs. There's a ranch there, but also—" He didn't finish, but Sarah felt him change their direction, heading toward the sound rather than away. "Sela, My cousin's group sometimes trades there, secretly, if they were caught. They created a rise and saw it. Smoke rising from burning buildings, figures on horseback wheeling and shooting, even from a distance. Sarah could see both blue uniforms and Apache warriors. Her heart sank. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was a massacre in the making. "We have to help them," Sela said, but his voice was hollow, already knowing the truth. "There are too many soldiers," Sarah said quietly. "You'll only die with them." His hands tightened on the reins. "Those are my people down there." "And I'm your people now, too," Sarah said firmly. "What would your cousin want for you to die uselessly? Or to survive and continue the fight another day?" For a long moment, Sela sat frozen, watching his kinsmen fall one by one. Sarah could feel the war inside him, duty against wisdom, honor against love. Finally, with a sound like a wounded animal, he turned the horse away. They rode in silence, Sela's grief a palpable thing between them. When they finally stopped in the shelter of some rocks, he dismounted and walked away, standing with his back to her, shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. Sarah approached carefully, the way he'd taught her to approach a wounded creature. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." "They're gone," he said, voice rough. "All of them, my uncle, my cousins, the last of my mother's clan." He turned to her, and she saw tears on his face, shocking in their rarity. "Do you understand now? This is what you're choosing. Death and running and watching everything you care about burn." "I understand," Sarah said. She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Do you? My people are dying. Sarah, soon there will be none of us left who remember the old ways, who know the names of the sacred places, and I'm running away with a white woman while they fight." The words stung, but Sarah understood they came from pain, not cruelty. "You're surviving," she said. "That's not the same as running, and I may be white, but I'm here. I chose this, I chose you." "Why?" The word came out cracked, desperate. "Why would you choose this death with me when you could have life with them?" Sarah thought of all the proper answers she could give, about love, about fate, about the connection she felt to him. But what came out was simpler, truer. Because with them, I'd be the walking dead, going through motions, following rules, living someone else's idea of life. With you, even if it's shorter, even if it's harder, it's real. It's mine. Sela stared at her for a long moment. Then suddenly he was there, pulling her against him, burying his face in her hair. His body shook with silent sobs, and Sarah held him. This fierce warrior who'd lost so much, offering what comfort she could. When the storm of grief passed, they sat together in the shade, sharing water, planning their next move. The massacre at Sulphur Springs would bring more soldiers, more patrols. The territory would become even more dangerous. "There's a place," Sela said finally. "Deep in the Dragon Mountains, hidden valley with water, game. Some of the old people spoke of it as a refuge, if we can reach it." "Then we go there," Sarah said simply. "It's 5 days hard riding, maybe 6. We'll have to avoid all the main trails, travel at night when we can. You'll need different clothes. That dress marks you as surely as a flag. Then we find different clothes." Sarah managed a small smile. "I've been wanting to try Apache dress anyway. Seems much more practical." That drew an answering smile from him. Small but real. "You continue to surprise me. Sarah McKenna." "Just Sarah now," she corrected. "Sarah McKenna died in that wagon attack. I'm someone new now." "Who are you then?" Sarah considered. "I don't know yet, but I'm excited to find out." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they prepared to move again. But first, Sela took her face in his hands, studying her as if memorizing every detail. "I need you to understand," he said. "From here, there's no going back. Once we go deeper into Apache territory, once you're seen with me as my woman, your old world will be closed to you forever. Even if I die, even if you escape, you'll never be welcome among whites again." "I understand," Sarah said, "but you're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "My old world was closed to me the moment you gave me water in the desert. Everything since then has just been accepting what my heart already knew." He kissed her then, fierce and possessive, and Sarah responded with equal fervor. When they broke apart, something had settled between them. The decision was made, irrevocable and complete. As they mounted the horse and turned toward the mountains, Sarah took one last look at the smoke still rising from Sulphur Springs. She thought of the life she was leaving, the settlements, the churches, the social calls and proper dresses. Then she thought of the life ahead, uncertain, dangerous, but lived on her own terms with a man who saw her as an equal, not a possession. "Ready?" Sela asked. Sarah pressed back against him, feeling his heartbeat against her spine, steady and strong. "Ready?" They rode into the gathering dusk, two figures on one horse, headed for a valley that might or might not exist, chased by armies and prejudice and the weight of history itself. But for the first time since she'd watched Thomas fall, Sarah felt no fear, only a wild, fierce joy at the thought of the unknown trail ahead. Behind them, the civilized world grew smaller with each stride. Ahead lay only wilderness and freedom, and that, Sarah thought, was exactly as it should be. They'd been running for 3 days when the inevitable happened. Sarah had just finished changing into the Apache dress Sela had traded for at a hidden camp soft deerskin that moved with her body. High moccasins that gripped the rocks when they heard the horses. "Down!" Sela hissed, pulling her behind a cluster of boulders. His rifle was already in his hands, his body coiled like a spring. Through a gap in the rocks, Sarah counted at least 8 riders approaching from the south. Her heart sank when she recognized the blue uniforms, but it plummeted further when she saw who rode with them. Apache scouts, trackers who'd thrown their lot in with the army. "Traitors," Sela breathed. And Sarah heard years of betrayal in that single word. The patrol was moving slowly, methodically, clearly following their trail. They would reach the rocks within minutes. Sarah's hand found the knife Sela had given her, though she knew it would be useless against so many. "When I tell you, run for that arroyo," Sela whispered, indicating a dry wash 50 yards away. "Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You will do as I say." His voice was iron. "This is my fight." "No." Sarah gripped his arm. "We're together now. Your fights are mine." He turned to look at her, and she saw pride war with fear in his eyes. Before he could argue further, a voice called out in Apache. One of the scouts had spotted something. Well. The voice that followed was pure Tennessee drawl. "Looks like we got ourselves some hiding rabbits." The soldiers spread out, surrounding the rocks. Sarah recognized the tactical precision. They were trapped. Sela's hand found hers, squeezed once. "Sela of the Chiricahua," the same voice called. "We know it's you. That horse of yours leaves a particular track. Why don't you come on out, save us all some trouble?" "And if I do?" Sela called back. "Well now, that depends. You alone up there?" Sarah saw Sela's jaw tighten. If he said yes, they'd shoot him the moment he showed himself. If he admitted to her presence... "I've got me a white woman," Sarah called out before Sela could stop her. "He captured me from a wagon train 5 days past." The lie came easily, born of desperation. Sela's eyes widened, but she pressed on. "Please help me. He's kept me prisoner." There was a long pause. Then, "Ma'am, you hurt." "No, but please." She let her voice crack with feigned hysteria. "I just want to go home." "All right now. Everybody stay calm." The commander's voice had changed. "Become careful. A white woman hostage complicated things. Sela, you let that woman go. We can talk about this peaceful-like." Sela played along, his voice harsh. She's mine by right of capture. You want her, you trade for her. Now you know we don't trade for captives. Let her go, and maybe we don't hang you right here. Sarah met Sela's eyes, trying to convey her plan. Trust me, she mouthed. He looked skeptical but nodded slightly. I'm coming out, Sarah called. Don't shoot. She stood slowly, hands visible, and began picking her way down the rocks. Behind her, she heard Sela moving, repositioning. The soldiers' attention was fixed on her now, the white woman in Apache dress, the captive they needed to rescue. That's it, ma'am. Nice and easy, the commander said. Sarah could see him now, a captain, weathered and competent-looking. You're safe now. Sarah stumbled, let out a sob that was only half-acted. The fear was real enough. Thank God, she gasped. I thought I'd never... She was halfway to the soldiers when it happened. From the north, new dust clouds appeared. Riders approaching fast. The Apache scouts shouted warnings. These weren't army reinforcements. Apache war party, someone yelled. Coming in hot. Chaos erupted. The soldiers wheeled to face the new threat, and Sarah dove for cover as bullets began to fly. She heard Sela's rifle crack from the rocks, saw one of the army scouts fall. The approaching Apache survivors from some scattered band had stumbled into the standoff and chosen their side without hesitation. In the confusion, Sarah crawled toward the arroyo Sela had indicated. Bullets whined overhead. Men shouted in English and Apache. Horses screamed. Through the dust and gun smoke, she saw Sela break from the rocks, running in a crouch, returning fire as he moved. A soldier spotted him, swung his rifle around. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed a rock and threw it, hitting the man in the shoulder. It wasn't much, but it spoiled his aim. Sela's shot didn't miss. The woman, someone shouted. Get the woman! But the army had bigger problems. The Apache war party had closed the distance, and the fighting became hand-to-hand in places. Sarah reached the arroyo and rolled into it, landing hard on the sandy bottom. Moments later, Sela dropped beside her. That was insane, he panted. It worked, didn't it? Sarah managed a wild grin despite the terror. They ran down the wash, using its twists and turns as cover. Behind them, the battle raged on. When they finally stopped, miles later, the sun was setting and the distant gunfire had faded to nothing. Those warriors, Sarah gasped, trying to catch her breath. Will they... They knew what they were doing, Sela said grimly. Probably the last of Red Sleeve's band. They've been hitting patrols all week. He looked at her with something like awe. That was quick thinking, dangerous, but quick. I couldn't let them take you. You could have been safe. They would have believed you, taken you back. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I told you, my place is with you. That night, they camped cold, not daring a fire. Sarah lay in Sela's arms, feeling the rapid beat of his heart gradually slow. They'd survived, but barely. And worse, now the army knew about her. They'll think I'm dead or recaptured, she said quietly. Either way, they'll keep hunting. Let them hunt. Sela's arms tightened around her. We're almost to the mountains. 2 more days, maybe less. And if your valley isn't there, if it's just a story, then we keep going. Mexico, maybe, or deeper into the mountains where even Apache fear to go. He pressed his lips to her hair. I won't let them take you. Sarah, not the army, not anyone. She believed him. But as she lay awake listening to the night sounds, Sarah wondered how many more close calls they could survive. The desert was vast, but it was getting smaller every day, squeezed by armies and hatred and the relentless march of civilization. Still, when Sela stirred beside her, murmuring her name in his sleep, Sarah felt no regret. She'd made her choice in that cave during the storm, and every moment since had only confirmed it. Let them hunt. Let the whole world stand against them. She'd found something worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, and Sarah finally slept. In her dreams, she and Sela rode through endless valleys where no soldiers followed, where the old way still lived, where love was enough to overcome any obstacle. When she woke, the dream faded, but the determination remained. 2 more days to the mountains, 2 more days to their hidden valley. And if it wasn't there, well, they'd face that together too. The sun rose on 2 figures moving through the desert like ghosts, leaving no trace, heading always toward the promise of sanctuary. Behind them, the world they'd known grew smaller with each step. Ahead lay only uncertainty and freedom. The battle came at dawn on the 4th day. They'd almost made it to the hidden valley when both forces found them. A patrol of soldiers from the east, a band of hostile Apache from the west. Sarah and Sela were caught in the middle, trapped on a narrow ridge with nowhere to run. "Stay behind those rocks," Sela ordered, checking his rifle. "No matter what happens." But Sarah was already loading the pistol he'd taught her to use. "We fight together or not at all." There was no time to argue. The first shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. The soldiers, seeing Sela, opened fire immediately. The Apache band, not from Sela's clan, but from a group that saw all whites as enemies, targeted Sarah the moment they spotted her pale hair. "They think we're traitors, both of us," Sela said grimly, returning fire. "Me for being with you, you for being with me." It was a bitter irony, caught between 2 worlds that wanted them dead for the crime of choosing each other. Sarah fired at a soldier trying to flank them, her hand steady despite the chaos. She'd learned much in their days together. The battle was savage and close. Sarah saw men fall on both sides, heard the terrible sounds of the wounded. Beside her, Sela fought with desperate efficiency, but they were vastly outnumbered. His ammunition was running low. Then she saw him, a young soldier, barely more than a boy, creeping up the rocks behind Sela. Without thinking, Sarah turned and fired. The soldier stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clattering down the slope. "Behind you!" Sela spun at her warning, firing at another attacker. Blood, so much blood. Sarah had never understood how much blood a body could hold until she saw it spilling onto the desert stones. Some of it was hers. A bullet had grazed her arm. Another had torn through her skirt, missing flesh by inches. The Apache warriors were pressing closer now, calling out challenges in their language. Sarah caught enough words to understand. They were calling Sela a betrayer, a man who'd lost his way. One of them, a scarred warrior with gray in his hair, seemed to recognize him. "Sela of the Chiricahua," he called. "You shame your father's memory. You shame all Apache." "I shame no one," Sela shouted back. "I choose my own path." "With a white devil you are no Apache." The words hit Sela harder than any bullet. Sarah saw him falter for just a moment, saw the doubt flash across his face. In that moment of hesitation, a soldier got a clear shot. "No!" Sarah threw herself at Sela, knocking him aside. The bullet meant for his heart tore through her shoulder instead, spinning her around, dropping her to the stones. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah gasped, her vision going white at the edges. She heard Sela roar her name, felt him catch her before she hit the ground. Warm wetness spread across her dress. "Sarah, Sarah, look at me." She tried to focus on his face, but it kept swimming in and out of clarity. Around them, the battle still raged, but it seemed distant now, unimportant. "I'm all right," she lied, tasting copper in her mouth. Sela pressed his hand to her shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. His face was terrible in its fury and fear. With his free hand, he raised his rifle and fired with deadly precision, keeping attackers at bay, but they both knew it was only a matter of time. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently. Sarah tried to nod, sending fresh waves of agony through her. If you help me," he whistled sharply. a piercing sound that cut through the gunfire. Impossibly, his horse appeared, picking its way through the rocks, trained to come when called. Sela lifted Sarah despite her cry of pain, swinging up behind her, his arms holding her secure. "We ride for the valley," he said in her ear. "Hold on to me." They burst from the rocks at full gallop. Bullets whined past them, and Sarah heard shouts in English and Apache. The horse ran like the wind itself, Sela guiding it with his knees while returning fire one-handed. Sarah's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the warm wetness spreading down her dress, and Sela's voice in her ear, telling her to hold on, to stay with him. The landscape blurred past. Rocks, cacti, the shocked faces of men trying to aim at a target moving too fast to track. Then, suddenly, they were through. The shooting faded behind them as they plunged into a narrow canyon Sarah hadn't even seen. The walls rose up on either side, so tight in places the horse had to slow to a walk. Behind them, confusion soldiers and Apache unwilling to follow into such an obvious trap. "Almost there," Sela kept saying. "Almost there, my heart, stay with me." My heart. He'd never called her that before. Sarah wanted to respond, but her tongue felt too heavy. The world was going gray at the edges, then black. She felt herself sliding, falling, but Sela's arms were there, always there. When she woke, it was to firelight and pain. She lay on soft furs, her shoulder wrapped in cloth that smelled of herbs. The ceiling above was rock, a cave, no, more finished than that, a dwelling built into the cliff itself. "Drink," a woman's voice, speaking accented English. An Apache woman appeared in Sarah's vision, older, with kind eyes but a wary expression. She held a cup to Sarah's lips, and Sarah drank, tasting something bitter but soothing. "Sela," Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Here." He appeared instantly, dropping to his knees beside her. His face was haggard, etched with worry. "You've been sleeping for 2 days. I thought—" His voice broke. "Takes more than one bullet to kill a McKenna," Sarah managed, attempting a smile. "You saved my life." Sela took her hand, gripping it like a lifeline. "That bullet was meant for me. Then we're even." Sarah looked around, taking in the dwelling, the Apache woman watching them with curiosity and judgment. The valley. "We made it," relief colored his voice. "This is Nantan's band, my mother's cousin. They've agreed to let you stay, to heal. After that," he glanced at the older woman. "After that, we'll see." The woman said something sharp in Apache, Sela responded, his tone respectful but firm. Sarah caught her own name, saw the woman's expression soften slightly. "She says you fought like Apache," Sela translated. That's high praise from her." "What's her name?" "Nana. She's our healer. She saved your life." Sarah met the woman's eyes. "Thank you," she said, putting all her gratitude into the words. Nana studied her for a long moment, then nodded. She spoke again to Sela, then left them alone. What did she say? Sela's expression was complex. "She says the spirits are confused about you. You have a white face, but an Apache heart. She says—" He paused. "She says such confusion often comes before great change." Sarah squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm not confused. I know exactly where I belong. Even after this, even after almost dying because of what we are to each other. Especially after this." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "We fought together, bled together. We proved that what's between us is stronger than their hate." Sela leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "You humble me," he whispered. "Your courage shames warriors twice your size." "I'm not brave," Sarah said. "I'm just too stubborn to let them win." That drew a small laugh from him, the first she'd heard since the battle. "Rest now. Heal. When you're strong, there are others you must meet. The band is small, 20 souls, maybe 25, but they're willing to listen, to consider. Your actions bought us that chance. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. But she had to ask. The soldiers, the warriors who attacked us. Gone. They searched for a day but couldn't find the entrance to the valley. This place, it truly is hidden. Safe. For now. For now. Those words held all the uncertainty of their future. But as Sarah drifted back to sleep, Sella's hand still holding hers, she felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Hope. The morning was cool and clear when Sarah finally emerged from the dwelling, her arm in a sling but her strength returning. 6 weeks had passed since the battle. 6 weeks of healing and learning and slowly earning her place among Nantan's people. Now, as she stood at the edge of the hidden valley with Sella, she could hardly believe they'd found such a sanctuary. It's beautiful, she said, looking out over the small paradise tucked between towering cliff walls. A spring fed a narrow stream that wound through cottonwoods and willows. Small gardens grew corn and squash in the rich soil. Children played between the cliff dwellings, their laughter echoing off the rocks. It won't last, Sella said quietly. Maybe a few years, maybe less. The world is changing too fast. The soldiers grow more numerous every season, even hidden places like this. He trailed off, but Sarah heard what he didn't say. Then we make the most of the time we have, she said firmly. That's all anyone can do. He looked at her, and she saw the mixture of love and sorrow that had become so familiar. You could still go back. Your shoulder has healed. You could tell them you escaped. That... Sella? She turned to face him fully. How many times must I say it? I chose this. I chose you. Every morning I wake up here. I choose it again. Even knowing what's coming, the army won't stop. They'll find this place eventually. And when they do, then we'll run again, find another place, or make our stand. But we'll do it together. She reached up with her good hand to touch his face. I didn't survive that bullet to give up now. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. The others want to leave at first snow, head deeper into Mexico. Nantan says there are still places there where Apache can live free, for a while at least. Then we go to Mexico. It will be hard, harder than anything we've faced. The Mexican soldiers hate Apache even more than the Americans. And you, a white woman with Apache, will draw attention everywhere. Sarah smiled, a fierce expression she'd learned from him. Let them look. Let them wonder. I know who I am now. And she did. These weeks among the people had taught her more than she'd imagined possible. She could tan hides, gather mesquite beans, speak enough Apache to make herself understood. More than that, she'd found her place in the intricate web of clan relationships. The children called her Aunt. The women included her in their work. And even the warriors had stopped looking at her with suspicion. Nana wants to speak with us, Sella said. She had a vision last night. They found the old healer sitting by the stream, watching the water flow over smooth stones. She looked up as they approached, her weathered face unreadable. Sit, she said in Apache, and they obeyed. For a long moment, she studied them both. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of dreams. I saw a long road stretching into darkness. I saw Apache scattered like seeds on the wind. I saw soldiers numerous as ants, covering the land. She paused. But I also saw something else. 2 hearts beating as one, neither Apache nor white, but something new. From them, children who will walk in both worlds, who will remember the stories when everyone else has forgotten. Sarah felt Sella's hand find hers. What does it mean? She asked in her halting Apache. Nana smiled, the expression transforming her stern features. It means the spirits have accepted what I suspected from the beginning. You are not an ending, white woman who fights like Apache. You are a beginning, a bridge between worlds that want only to destroy each other. I don't understand. Sarah said, You will. Nana rose, more agile than her years suggested. When the time comes to choose between war and peace, between the old ways and the new, you will understand. Both of you will." She left them sitting by the stream, her words hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah leaned against Sela, feeling the solid warmth of him. "A bridge," she murmured. "Is that possible? Can two people be a bridge across so much hate?" "I don't know," Sela admitted. "But I know this. When I found you in the desert, I thought I was saving one lost woman. Instead, you saved me. From bitterness. From choosing death over life. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything." As the sun climbed higher, they walked through the valley together. Sarah had learned to see it through Apache eyes now, not just as a hiding place, but as a living thing. Every plant had a use. Every rock formation told a story. The children who ran past called out greetings, and Sarah responded in their language, making them giggle at her accent. "When we leave," she said, "I want to take some of the soil with us, to remember." "We'll take more than soil." Sela said, "We'll take the stories, the songs, the knowledge. That's what survives when places are lost." They paused at the dwelling they'd come to share. Small but sufficient. Sarah had made it a home with small touches, wildflowers in a clay pot, a blanket she'd woven with Nana's teaching. Sela's weapons arranged just so on the wall. It wasn't the house in California Thomas had dreamed of, but it was more truly hers than any place had ever been. "I need to tell you something," Sela said suddenly, in case we don't have another chance." Sarah's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Tell me. You asked once why I rode alone when I found you. The truth is, I was looking for a place to die. My people were gone, the old ways dying, everything I'd fought for turning to dust. I thought I would make one last stand somewhere, take as many soldiers with me as I could. But you didn't. No, because I found you, and suddenly I had a reason to live again. Not just to survive, but to truly live, to imagine a future instead of only mourning the past." He turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "You gave me that. Whatever comes next, you gave me that." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "You gave me the same. I was the walking dead out there, going through motions. You brought me back to life." They held each other as the sun reached its peak, two souls who'd found light in the darkness of a dying world. Around them, the hidden valley went about its daily life. Children learning, women working, men planning the journey south. It was a moment of perfect peace, all the more precious for its fragility. That night, the whole band gathered around a great fire. Stories were told, songs were sung. Sarah sat among them, no longer a stranger but a member of the clan. When Nantan called for silence and spoke of the journey ahead, of the dangers and hopes, Sarah understood every word. "We are the last free Apache in this territory," the old chief said. "But we are not the last Apache. As long as we carry our ways in our hearts, as long as we teach our children, as long as we remember, we survive. And sometimes," his eyes found Sarah and Sela, "we find new strength in unexpected places." The fire burned low as the night wore on. One by one, families drifted to their dwellings. Finally, only Sarah and Sela remained, watching the embers glow like fallen stars. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "But not of dying, of forgetting this, of losing what we've found." "Then we won't forget. We won't lose it. We'll carry it with us wherever the trail leads." He pulled her close. "North or south, Mexico or beyond, together or apart, what we have doesn't end." Sarah thought of the wagon train, of Thomas and his California dreams, of the woman she'd been who died in the desert. That life seemed like someone else's story now. Her real life had begun the moment an Apache warrior offered water to a dying woman, choosing mercy over vengeance. "No," she agreed, watching the last flames dance. "It doesn't end. It just changes shape, like fire becoming smoke becoming sky." They sat in silence as the fire died completely, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Tomorrow would bring preparations for the journey, decisions about what to take and what to leave behind. But tonight, in this hidden valley that had given them shelter, Sarah and Sela simply existed, not as Apache and White, not as symbols of conflict or bridges between worlds, but as two people who'd found love in the most unlikely place. The desert wind sang through the canyon walls, and Sarah listened to its music. It spoke of endless distances and ancient mysteries, of loss and renewal, of endings that were really beginnings. She'd learned to hear its voice these past months, learned to find hope in its harsh whispers. When they finally rose and walked to their dwelling, Sarah paused at the threshold. Behind them lay the dying fire and all the uncertainty of the future. Ahead lay only the moment, this breath, this heartbeat shared between two souls who'd chosen love over fear. "Ready?" Sela asked, echoing his question from so long ago. Sarah smiled, remembering her answer then, knowing it still held true. "Ready." They stepped inside together, and the night wrapped around the hidden valley like a blessing, holding it safe for one more day. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of the Wild West. Please share in the comments below if you felt the passion and struggle of Sarah and Sela's forbidden love. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. Your thoughts and reactions mean everything to us, so please share what touched your heart in this tale of love conquering the impossible.